So, I've seen your video, like, asking the question, and your video is mainly another atheist fails the question. And then I've watched your video, the proofs for Christianity, and I'm going to, first of all, answer the question, and refute your proofs for Christianity. So, first off, I'm going to say what every other atheist has said that you've asked the question to. They say atheism is not making a positive statement, which is true. The definition of atheism, as defined by Princeton.edu, is the lack of belief in a God. Or God, this is multiple plural. But, so that is not making a positive statement. That's not saying there is no God, it's just rejecting your God. Of course, there are other definitions where it's like the belief that there is no God, and so that's probably what you were alluding to. And I am going to then take that stance to answer your question, so you don't be like, oh, yet another atheist can't answer the question. So I am taking that specific stance. I will take the stance, I will agree with you, atheism will be defined as the doctrine or belief that there is no God. So with that in mind, I would have to provide evidence. But you would have to provide evidence for Christianity, and we'll talk about the burden of proof in just a second. But first off, you asked for proof and evidence. So by evidence, you probably mean physical evidence. I mean, you could mean philosophical proofs as well, which I'll get to eventually. But we could have physical evidence. So first off, you cannot have physical evidence of something's non-existence. So let's see. The best way I could put this would be, take for example, here, this vase, okay? You see it exists. I have physical evidence of its existence. Even if I shattered the vase, lost all the pieces except one, I would still have physical evidence that the vase existed because I had part of it. But you cannot have physical evidence of something not existing. It's a logical fallacy. So, take for example, like the best thing I can do, the best thing I can tell you is absence of evidence is evidence of absence. So take for example, let's see, there is, in my hand, there is nothing in my hand, okay? So I could say, well, the guitar pick does not exist in my hand because there is no evidence for it existing there. That would be absence of evidence is evidence of absence, and that's the best physical evidence I can give you for something not existing, because you just cannot have physical evidence for something not existing, really. It just doesn't work. But so here, let's say I put a guitar pick in my hand. We would have physical evidence of the guitar pick existing in my hand. But take, for example, it's gone. You have no evidence of it existing in my hand. And then you'll claim that, oh, well, you have evidence of God existing. And that's what your proofs are, and I will get to those in a minute. But, which I will disprove them. But if we assume that you have no evidence, which you really don't, and again, I'll get to that in a minute, it's evidence of absence is absence of... I mix that up. Absence of evidence is evidence of absence. There is absence of evidence for God. Therefore, in most scenarios, it's evidence that God doesn't exist. I hope I'm phrasing this right, because I'm kind of winging this in a sense. And it's kind of hard to explain something that most people understand, that you cannot have physical evidence of something not existing. But if I'm not explaining this properly, just shoot me a message and I will make another video explaining it in a better way. And so then we get to the philosophical proofs, though. So first off, we'll talk about the Christian God. The Christian God is supposedly omnipotent, omniscient, and everything all wonderful and loving. And so then we'll pose the problem of evil that Epicurus proposed. And so Epicurus said, is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not omnipotent. Because if he was willing to prevent evil, but he's not able, then he's just not all-powerful. Is God able to prevent evil but not willing, which you guys would claim, well, I mean, he's all-powerful, but there's still evil, so that's the one that fits, then he would be malevolent. So he would not be loving. Therefore, that part in the Bible would be incorrect. Or, is God neither willing nor able? Then why call him God? So, we have three scenarios. We have the first one, which is God's not omnipotent, therefore that part in the Bible is just shut out. Or God is not loving, if he chooses not to prevent evil, that's shut out. Or both are incorrect. It just doesn't work. I can link you to some other philosophical arguments below, because I'll be perfectly honest with you, I cannot give you philosophical arguments that well, because that's just not my thing. But let's also talk about the scientific part. So, there really is no need for a God, and this can be shown by disproving your proofs. And so, without further ado, let's jump in. Your first proof is the fine-tuning argument, which I hate with a passion because it's just so stupid. So many people have shut this down. Let's see. I believe Stephen Hawking did in his new book, The Grand Design. Richard Dawkins dedicated an entire chapter in the God Delusion to it. There's been ZHAEMP-TV has talked about it. Let's see, who else? Neil deGrasse Tyson has talked about stupid design. So there's just tons of people that have talked about this. And I've written about it as well, and I will post a link to what I've written about it in the description box. But first off, one of the annotations that you have as you're writing your motorcycle later on is talking about the nuclear weak force. I believe, you didn't really phrase it right, because it's not called the atomic force weak or whatever you said. But I assume what you mean is the weak nuclear force. And the weak nuclear force actually does not have to even exist for the universe to literally be pretty much exactly the same as it does now. And this was shown by experiments. I forget the scientist's name. I will link it in an annotation above my head here as well. And I'll post the links to these reports in the description box too. So it's been shown the weak nuclear force does not even need to exist for there to be the universe similar to us and stars to still exist. So your argument about the weak nuclear force being fine-tuned on a razor's edge is just not true at all, because it doesn't even need to exist. And that's one of the 4 fundamental forces of nature. Next off, in another annotation about a minute and a half or so later, you mentioned the gravitational force constant. You're like, if it was higher by 1 part in 1040, stars like our sun would not exist, and habitable stars would not exist. But here, a major fallacy is made. And something that I don't think you realize about stars is stars have something that's called a habitable zone. A habitable zone is the distance from the star compared to its temperature where liquid water can form. So for us, it's about Earth is 1 astronomical unit away from the sun. Yes, 1 astronomical unit away from the sun. And so we're in the habitable zone of our size star. So a star that is our size has a habitable zone 1 astronomical unit away. So if the gravitational force constant was higher, our sun would be more compressed. It would be hotter, therefore, because hydrogen is fusing into helium faster and it's producing more radiant heat. But therefore, the habitable zone would be further away. But it would not be non-existent. It would just be further away. And again, conversely, if you lower the gravitational force constant, the habitable zone would just be closer because the star would have, it wouldn't be as hot. But changing it wouldn't eliminate the habitable zone. That's something that I don't think you understand. And this is crucial to understand, because your argument about the gravitational force constant is entirely contingent on whether or not the habitable zone can still exist. And we have shown that it still can exist. Just do research about the habitable zone. But let's also talk about other studies that have been done. Other studies that have been done talk about assuming that we can randomize every constant. If we jumble the constants, all of them, and jumble them and just pick a constant out of random like roulette, 25% of the time, a universe that can sustain life, have stars, and everything arises. So that's really not that improbable to happen by chance. 25% of the time, sure, it's not majority, but it's really not that small. So, and again, I'll link you the report down in the description box. So then, also, what you're making the assumption here, you're making 2 assumptions. One, you're assuming that the constants can even be randomized, which we don't really know. As Richard Dawkins puts in his book, I might be quoting this right or wrong, I'll also put an annotation, we may soon find out that the variability of the constants is as static as the relationship between pi and the the circumference of a circle. So that's basically saying that we don't even know whether the constants can be changed. And you're also making the assumption that you're changing one constant. So in your annotations, you're talking about changing one constant. And the reason that's a really unfair judgment to make is because that is more improbable than all the constants being randomized and coming out with life. Because, for this reason, there were like 14 or some odd constants, I don't know the exact number, but you're assuming we're going to randomize one, and all of them balance out with each other. So if you randomize one, it's inevitable that something bad would happen because you're not randomizing all of them. You're only randomizing one, such as the weak nuclear force or the gravitational force, but they all balance each other out. And again, you're also making the assumption, which you also state in your video, life as we know it would not exist. That does not mean life in general, that means life as we know it. So we don't know whether there are other forms of life. The only forms of life we know are carbon-based, and like carbon-based life forms, but so assuming that we are the only form of life is kind of egotistical, but also we don't know whether there are other forms of life. So in short, the fine-tuning argument does not work, and I will also provide the anthropic principle, which is something else that's been talked about. So let's assume, what would we see if life did not exist in our universe? What would we see if the physical constants were drastically different, that life did not exist? We would see nothing, because we would not exist. So us being here necessitates that the universe evolved the way it did. Us being here makes it so the universe's constants have to be suitable for life. If not, we wouldn't even be pondering the question of fine-tuning. So, and also, if I didn't explain anything properly, again, with any of the things I'm saying, you can send me a message and I will re-explain them. So, essentially, but then let's ignore everything I've said. If we ignore everything I've said, and we assume that the constants are fine-tuned for life, it doesn't prove Christianity at all. It proves deism. It proves that there then would be a God, but it doesn't prove your God, doesn't prove Islam's God, doesn't prove Judaism's God, it just proves there's a God. Which again, I showed that your argument doesn't work, but, whatever. So then let's see your next